Welcome to Wise Up on Air. It's 2022. How did that happen? The last time we touched base here on this live stream where we feature exciting projects from developers using Wise, we spoke with Hazelight about It Takes Two. This was an amazing live stream. I hope that folks who are just getting hip to Wise Up on Air as a series will travel backward in time to our last presentation. And here we are again today. It's a new year. It's a new version of Wise on the horizon. If you're new to Wise, we release a new version each year. New features, improvements, increased performance and stability. More about that in the future. But one of the things that's new, if you visited audiokinetic.com recently, our website got a complete glow up. Branding redesign, layout, organization. We're hoping that this is easier for folks to find their way into the ecosystem of Wise. And from our homepage, you can check out different solutions that we have for gaming, AR, VR, location-based entertainment, as well as the solutions that we have, educational materials. I kind of love this new hub that we put in that gets you started with resources for Wise. So if you want to access documentation and learning materials, you can jump right in. And from here, we take you to our newly formatted documentation. Easier to access, clear step-by-step walkthroughs, and deep implementation details. Great new formatting. So hope folks are digging that. And then we have our community section where we bring together resources like this live stream and help present different perspectives on the interactive audio journey. So today we have some guests coming up who've contributed to a recent blog. The music of Spacefolk City will be joined here in a few by Vince and Alex. But we also have a ton of other resources of the blog. I almost call it the secret manual to Wise, where we talk about different aspects and go deep on different developer perspectives. So there's a great article recently by Chen Song, part of our China studio at Audiokinetic, about using Pure Data and Heavy to develop DSP plugins, extending the functionality of Wise. Some cool art projects from the Song of the World Beast. A great insight into our development process with our Wise Unreal integration, penned by Guillaume Renaud from the Audiokinetic Montreal studio, and just a ton more here for you to dig into. And that brings me to what we usually do here on Wise Up on Air next, and that's feature some community spotlight, things that folks have been doing out there on the ground using Wise. The first thing is there's this great overview of creating a robot dialogue system, so stitching together little pieces of audio to create a non-verbal language. And again, the steps of building this throughout the video, some great gameplay examples. Of how that gets stitched together and made unique. So this is just one slice into our Wwise community, creating these resources for people to learn and grow from. The next one is from Funk Hazard here, just a really shallow step into video game music and randomness in Wwise. It's fantastic overview for folks who are still trying to get their heads wrapped around it. Definitely worth investigating there. We'll get the links into the chat. Along with this, Unreal Engine Wwise, how to keep your game music alive across transitions. So in a game that navigates between levels, between worlds, how do you keep your music system going across those transitions without having to stop the music and restart it? Maintaining that thread. And Fabien Fabro has done a great job of giving an introduction to that. And it's a pretty fantastic community we have. I'd just like to give a shout out to them for creating these resources. And again, we'll get those links for you into the chat. Well, without further ado, I am going to spin the introduction to today's topic. This is the trailer for Spacefolk City, a Oculus Quest and Rift platform VR game. All right, so welcome back. I'm joined here today with Alex and Vince. How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Woo. Welcome to Wwise Up on Air. We're so excited to have you today. Spacefolk City. That game looks fun. So glad to have you both here today to talk about music and all things sound for this VR experience. But let's start with a little introduction and get this out of the way. You are both part of another live streaming series that's been going on a long time. But before I introduce you, why don't you introduce yourselves to our community?
Cool. Vince, you want to go first?
Sure. Let's see. My name is Vincent Diamante. I did, some music, a little bit of sound for this game as well, Spacefolk City. But I've been in the game industry for a while, since the mid-2000s, doing a lot of mobile stuff and whatnot. Worked for a couple of companies over the years, like That Game Company. But I do a lot of projects on the side in the video game world. And Alex, who is the audio director lead on this project and at his company, he was really gracious and excited actually to work with me, which was really cool. We've known each other for a number of years, but this is actually our first time working together on this project in any sort of professional, serious project capacity. But prior to that, we did actually work for years on this thing called Game Audio Hour, which is pretty consistent, kind of off and on. But we've been going at it for years now. More than 200 episodes across YouTube and Twitch, and now we're doing a more traditional podcast format, which we just started that towards the end of last year. But we've been doing this Game Audio Hour series for 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
It's really been a long time. It's actually really cool. I'm really glad that I can call Alex a longtime friend, not just a professional colleague in this game audio world.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of the Game Audio Hour for since its inception. Shout out to Kyle, Michael, and Chase, who are also regular hosts on that. And again, a great discussion that really taps into the moment of interactive audio. Appreciate your work on that.
Well, thank you. Alex, go for it.
Yeah, I'm Alex, and I am the director and co-founder and also audio lead for Moon Mode, which is a tiny, tiny company of 3 people spread out across the world. I'm from Australia, but I live in Sweden, and my colleagues are from Scotland and also another colleague from Sweden as well. We met in Japan a long time ago working for a company called Vitae Backroom. And yeah, I think I've been doing game audio for about I think a little bit more than 10 years. So I guess relatively short compared to you esteemed veterans. I'm relatively new to the industry only at around the 10, 11 year mark, I think. But it's been fantastic. And I've always, I think because we started Game Audio Hour about 7 years ago, I guess. I joined in.
Yeah.
No, I joined in after you guys had already gotten some momentum with it. But it was a wonderful introduction to this. I always say that the game industry itself is very unique in that I've worked for a number of other industries previously, like in corporate stuff, and I was an industrial designer for a while and a graphic designer as well. And there's nowhere else that you'll find such a lack of rivalry. It's just this camaraderie instead, where it doesn't really matter which company you work for or what you're doing. We're all making great games and we're all loving each other's games. And within that, you've got this little kind of island of game audio. And I'm so proud to be, part of the community and to have had the opportunity to enjoy it for the time that I have, because I always liken it to being the bass player. Generally, when you're a game audio person, there's usually sort of one or maybe 2 of you in a company, or maybe a few more if you're lucky to work in a larger company. But there's usually, you're like the bass player, right? Nobody really gives you much credit. You can see the bassist behind me. I'm a bass player.
Clearly.
I'm a bit biased. But nobody gives you much credit, but they all will admit that if you're not playing or if you're doing a bad job, then it really, really stands out. But it's only when you're doing a great job as a game audio professional or a bassist that nobody really notices.
Yeah.
But it's so important, and everybody knows deep down that it's so important. And I think that's why us game audio people, we're like bass players. We band together very, very tightly.
Yeah.
Just because we all share the same kind of struggles and the same experiences and artistic and technical challenges. And so
well, and as
great.
Evidenced here, right? You and Vince have known each other for a long time. The wheel turns, and eventually you're able to work together. And I think that a lot of us feel that similarity where, we might be talking today across companies, across countries, but tomorrow, who knows, we might be in the same place doing the same thing together. And it that spirit, I will say, is pervasive in game audio. I have felt it as well. So
Yeah.
good perspective on that. And what we're talking about today, Spacefolk City, actually, Alex, you're co-founder of the studio that produced the game. Talk about how that inception came. Again, like you said, you had been freelance and bouncing around for a while on the audio side of the spectrum. Like, why the transition? Why make your own game? Why Spacefolk City?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, I worked for this company in Japan that specialized in VR games. That's Vitae Backroom. And they had more of a portfolio in location-based entertainment for VR. And this, we're talking like 2014, 2015, sort of very early days in this new renaissance of VR that we're in at the moment since the 90s. And at a certain point, winds started to move me in the direction of Europe. And so I came to Europe, and then two other colleagues from the same Vitae Backroom studio joined me here in Europe, and we created our own company called Moon Mode. And we were doing contract work for VR things, but the dream was always to be making our own game. And ironically and very, very miraculously, it was actually coronavirus that kind of turned our fortunes around, because we were stuck in sort of a contract to contract cash flow crunch kind of situation. And anybody who's worked for a small game company out there doing contract work will know exactly what I'm talking about and how difficult that is. And then when coronavirus happened, all of that income just suddenly disappeared overnight. And it was a real kind of Hail Mary situation where it's like, well, here we are. What do we do? I mean, we're looking at, basically about a month or a bit more of liquidity left in our little company. So I guess we'll just try and make a game. So we actually made a pitch document. It was sort of a Spacefolk City in itself, just as a brief interlude there to explain the game. Basically, it is I like to describe it as if you think of what Mario Kart is to racing games, Spacefolk City is to city building games. So Mario Kart is a racing game. Anybody can enjoy it, but really what you're getting is sort of the skim across the top of the joy of playing a racing game, just sort of the distilled fun elements of what you can enjoy in a racing game is what Mario Kart does very well. What our intention with Spacefolk City, it was to be the same kind of thing, but for city building games and in VR. So when we started developing and when we first pitched it, there were no other, on the Oculus platform, there were no other city building games. It had never really been done before, especially on the Oculus Quest. And so we were very fortunate to come up with this idea at a very, very good moment when Oculus were thinking, we really need something to fill that gap for people who want to play city building games. The problem is city building games, as you know, often tend to be capable of scale. You have large metropolises and things like that. We were working with the Quest 1 hardware, which is basically a powerful Android processor. So the immediate challenge that we had was, how do we do this, so that it makes sense to be in VR? Like, why would you want to play a city building game in VR unless there was a specific reason for it? That was the first challenge. Second challenge was, how do we do this in a graceful way so that the game feels fun to play at smaller scales of city rather than massive sprawling metropolises like you can do in, City Skylines and SimCity and the other big flagship city building games out there. So the solution we came up with was, as you saw in that trailer just there, rather than building out sideways, Spacefolk City has you build sort of clumps of city in front of you in VR space. And you're basically attaching chunks of building sort of onto each other, and the Spacefolk are walking around that. So it is we like to think of it as a very natural application of what VR can do well, which is basically 3 dimensions in front of you, rather than just, you could probably pull it off as a flat screen game, but it'd be a lot of panning and scrolling to be turning your city around all the time. In our case, though, if you're playing it in a more spacious area with a Quest, you can just walk around and poke your head in and look around at your city quite freely. which is a really wonderful feeling in VR.
Yeah, and with the goal of accessibility, I think, and your experience developing for VR, right? What you said about it not translating necessarily to a flat screen, I think that leveraging the inherent capabilities of VR, like making a game for VR instead of translating a 3D game that might historically be accessed through a screen, really brings what's special about VR to the platform. So nice intersection.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. One of the things that we learned very, very, very painfully early on when we started with VR, that when we started in 2014 in Japan, there were no guidelines, there were no sort of, best practices for VR design. It was just, whatever, this is an open sea, let's just go for it, try anything. And as a result, we learned very quickly the very painful, nauseating way that there are certain things that just VR is just not good at.
Yeah.
One of those things happens to be traversal movement, like moving around like this, or
Right.
Nowadays it's not so uncommon to have essentially mechanics that are the same as just playing 3D games in a VR space, where you've got like a thumbstick or something and you're just moving yourself around like this.
Yeah.
But what we learned early on is that, I think over the years it's been interesting to observe that there's this culture amongst some players where it's like an expectation that if you want to play an in-depth VR game, you've got to get used to it. You've got to get your, as they call them, VR legs. This game could make you feel uncomfortable, but that's your problem. That's not our problem. You want to play it, you've got to stomach it. And I think because of that background that we had doing those things ourselves and learning the hard way, that wow, you do some testing in the morning and knocks you out for the entire day. It's like you just want to lie on the floor looking at the ceiling.
Right. So I think one of the things that actually helps with that, maybe it's disassociation with VR, generally speaking, is audio, right? Audio can be that grounding factor for a lot of people that helps keep them stable in that virtual environment. And of course, we're going to dig deeper into some of the pieces of that. But I think back to the accessibility piece, music, right? Immediately in that trailer, in the experience, like the music decisions that have been made to support what's on screen. Tell me a little bit about how that collaboration came together. Of course, you and Vince have the history, so it's there. But where did that discussion start for you, Alex, internally at Moon Mode? And then how did it branch outward and start to coalesce?
Yeah, it was really the early days of the project when we started talking about music were just so much fun. And basically, at Moon Mode, we have an approach where we always like to do the music first. So music discussions happen right at the very beginning, together with my colleague Therese, who is our amazing concept artist, 3D artist, VFX artist, everything artist. She's wonderful because she has she's very sensitive to music, but in a totally different way to me. And I find that as a music producer, we often become very distracted by the technicalities of what we're doing. And her approach, she has a very sophisticated understanding and appreciation of music, but entirely from an emotional angle. So for working in the conceptual phase of game production with somebody like that, discussing music at the same time as discussing, the visual aspect of the game and the gameplay aspects, it's just so much fun, and especially when you've got colleagues that you can bounce things off of. So actually, Damien, if you will, we have a concept picture up here. Thank you. This is the very first sort of polished concept piece that Therese did to sort of illustrate what she wanted the game to feel like, together in discussions with me about how we wanted the game to sound. We had sort of as you can see here, this is sort of the concept of, this is obviously much, much larger than Spacefolk City ended up being able to accommodate. But this sort of illustrates like the kind of kooky, strange, absurd, sort of subtly humorous. Like, it's not obviously funny, but there's sort of a dry wit to it. And that's very much comes from Therese's personality. So when we started talking about the music, immediately my mind, I had a few considerations, and I guess one important consideration was the sound. It had to be something that could sound good on the internal speakers of a Oculus Quest. They're these tiny little speakers that sit up here by your temples. I wanted something that could be mixed so that it would sound pretty decent on really small speakers. And then the aesthetics of this, immediately we're going for a sci-fi B-movie, slightly campy, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a little bit silly, but not too silly, just very subtly ridiculous. The thing that immediately came to mind was an album by the Yellow Magic Orchestra. There's a Japanese, sort of a seminal early synth pop, jazz fusion, not really jazz fusion, I guess, synth pop group from Japan called the Yellow Magic Orchestra. And they were very active in the late 70s and the early 80s during that incredibly exciting time for music, when so much going on at that period that was so exciting. You had disco, you had jazz fusion, electric fusion, all paving the way for, new wave and house music and techno and all of that would come much later. And of course, 80s pop music. And the advent of the synthesizer being something that musicians could afford, and then all of the crazy stuff that was coming out of that. So the Yellow Magic Orchestra, one of their albums called Solid State Survivor, which I think is 79, was the perfect sort of concept album that Therese and I kept on coming back to when we were discussing this. It's weird, it's kind of poppy, but it's also a little avant-garde in some areas as well. It's just very strange. So, being a very, very small company that we are, it only made sense that I would need some help, because I also have to do a lot of the production management aspects of the game as well. So I decided that I would want to collaborate with somebody. The first person that I thought of who would get this, I was thinking, who do I know that would immediately understand what Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra is actually about, like that campy B sci-fi aspect of it. Who do I know? And I thought, has to be Vince. Has to be Vince.
Nice.
Because Vince, Vince even plays the Iwi. I mean, that is,
Yeah. So you get the brief from Alex. He's like, Solid State Survivor, YMO, Vince, let's do this. Like, where's your brain going? What's happening?
Wow. My brain was actually really excited. I was like, oh, this is awesome, because I love Yellow Magic Orchestra. And then it sort of turned on itself and twisted itself into a knot, because that is not what I usually do. It's I've done some stuff in the past that is kind of hinting at that stuff, and I'm really very aware of sort of that. It's not so much a lineage, but yeah, that sort of interesting tradition of Japanese music in the 70s and 80s, and how so much of it is kind of satirical and aware of how outside of Japan sort of views Japanese music, and they're also extremely aware of what's going on elsewhere in the world with electronic music developments. And so, it's just cool. I love it. When he said that, I was like, yes, I have the CD right over there. I can go and grab it.
That's right.
And again, I was also like slightly worried, because like, oh man, that's a different headspace for me to put myself into if I want to make some stuff like this. But it was really fun. It was really, really fun. And and kind of stepping back a little bit and thinking about it from that larger perspective of, here we are in the late 70s, and suddenly we're doing all this other stuff with electronic music. People are excited about doing electronic music in different ways. Even if I had some trepidation about, this particular anchor point when it comes to the musical styling, I was super excited about where I was sort of dropping myself into and thinking about how that could explode out into what the soundtrack would eventually be.
Yeah, actually, I remember, Vince, in our first opening briefing call, I said, "Do you know Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra?" And you actually had the CD. It's like, "Yeah, I've just got it over here." It's like, this is the guy. This is the guy for the job. Yeah.
And I think
I like
so,
CDs. I like my physical media.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that intersection of synthesis and pop music at that moment in time, because we had lived through the switched on box, we had our Kraftwerks,
Yeah.
we had been through iterations of fusion and, all of its various guises, but there is something special about that intersection with disco and pop, funk, and other genres of, upbeat music that really synthesized itself at that time. And as
Yep.
you mentioned, having access to electronic instruments at a reasonable price point, helping to pave that way, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next step after that was we started to discuss the audio spec, and enter Wise. Actually, Wise was just an obvious choice because I've actually only, sorry, Fmod, but I've actually only used Wise throughout my entire career. So it was an obvious choice for the task. But the Vince and I sort of started to discuss like what can we do with the audio that would be kind of fun, kind of fitting with the sort of ridiculous absurdity of the game. Firstly, the elephant in the room here is obviously being a VR game. The elephant in the room obviously is sort of binaural spatialization. And being that I was kind of very, very strapped for time myself, this is the problem when you're a small company that, you wear so many hats at the same time. Ultimately, you are kind of only giving, if you're doing 3 roles on a game project, you're sort of giving 1/3 of yourself to every one of them. And I knew from the beginning that, well, I could sort of drop in a spatializer and not a spatializer, drop in a binaural solution and try and go down that route. But the other thing that in this particular case, obviously what going on Android devices, I wanted to make sure that we were having absolutely bare minimum CPU impact, like the expense of processing. I know that binaural processors are very good these days and they're not that intense, but still I wanted to make sure that we had never a problem where our programmer Chris would come along saying, sorry, but audio's taken up too much.
You mentioned the Quest 1 being a high-end Android device. Just because of how much time has passed, I feel like I need to say this was a high-end Android device for 2017. So it's been a while, and I don't know if you remember Android phones back then. They weren't exactly the hottest stuff when it came to processing power, and they were using this as the brains for the Quest 1 at the time.
Yeah.
And it helps that the Quest 1 is quite a bit larger than an Android phone, so it could run at peak power without having to throttle down like a phone format would. But there's not a lot of power in there. There really isn't.
Yeah, so the key thing in this particular case was that unlike other VR games where you're standing in an environment, and you've got things above, below, behind in these kinds of locations, in this particular case, the majority, and I mean really 95% of the time, the player is just going to be standing right in front of their city. All of the action is going to be on the city, and there's very little that you'll actually hear that will ever be on top of you or below you or behind you. All of the sounds are encapsulated in this bubble that's, for the most part, right in front of you. So,
and was that something you knew right away? Like this would be the framing of the game, and so you could make that technology decision about, to binauralize or not. It sounds like that helped shape your decisions there.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess this is the for anybody out there who's a game developer who is not in audio, please have your audio people start at the very beginning of your project because it makes that kind of decision as you're seeing the gameplay take shape, and you realize that, oh, okay, in this particular game, there's never going to be something behind you that makes noise or on top of you. So ultimately, is it worth having some kind of binaural solution here? Probably yes. Do we have the time for it? No. All right. Well, maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe it'll be all right if we just do it this way. So yeah, ultimately, it's not the best. It's not the ideal solution. I would like it to be, 3 or 4 times more complex and using the full extent of Wise's capabilities. But considering the time that we had and considering these basic elements of how the gameplay would be played out, it seemed like a decision that I could kind of get away with. Well, that's a terrible way to say it, but
But it's smart management of your resources and of your time, right? And the fact that
Yeah.
capability exists within Wise, it's within reach if at some point your development pivots. But as you were saying, like being involved early on meant that you didn't have to go down that road because you were so entwined with the development that you knew exactly where things were headed. You were part of those discussions, and that meant you could effectively manage your time and where you put your energy into. And again, I think we'll see a couple examples here of places where you did put in a level of fidelity to try and, expose what's cool about Spacefolk City and really bring the music and sound into that world in a way that fit the world, right? That wasn't just bolted on because you were part of that process. So I want to step back into like what was the delegation here between the two of you? Like how did that collaboration work? You're like Alex, you're deep in it. You know what things are shaping up to be. Was it a level-based system? Was it a checkpoint-based system? Like how did you collaborate to start creating the music that's in the game?
Yeah, basically, Vince and I decided early on that we thought that a radio station would be kind of fitting with the absurdity of the experience. Also, being a city building game, you obviously want to have a decent amount of diversity in the sounds of the music that you're hearing. Ultimately, the music shouldn't really be too intrusive because you could, as a city building game, ideally, we would want our players to be playing it for a long time. We don't want the music to ever become repetitive or annoying or anything like that. So a radio station made good sense because you have, a random playlist of songs. Every now and then you'll have, this sort of radio bumper kind of thing to remind you're listening to radio. The original concept was actually that in order to make a reason that the music was stereo locked to your head, and of course music is always a bit of a challenge in VR space, what to do with music. What we were thinking to do, which we didn't actually do in the end because we didn't have time, was to have a pair of headphones that you put on. So you're actually putting on a pair of headphones in VR, and so that way when you're moving your head like this, it makes sense that the music is panning with you because you've got headphones on. So
yet another reason to have audio involved, because that conceit of what is music supposed to do, well, make it part of the game, and that sounds
right.
Sounds exactly like how you can justify that creative choice on the music side of things. So Vince, are you in the background while these technology things are happening, just getting your sample library ready, getting your templates in place? Like, what's your process over here as you're given the brief to YMO the heck out of this? Where are you at?
It was really fun actually just watching a lot of this discussion talk, not just the music and sound discussion, but all the stuff that was developing on the art side, because there were a lot of interesting things happening when it came to, what exactly is the humor of the game going to be. People were coming up with different ideas, for what the characters, what your space folk are going to be into. Like, banana was one of the really early ones. It's like, oh man, bananas are awesome. I love bananas, and attracting people to like banana houses, and it's like, and people had all sorts of fun things. So it was a very open discussion. What could these space folk be into? And so yeah, I did have this whole thing of, okay, what am I going to use? I settled on a little bit old school, analog synths. I have an Iwi. But more importantly, I have...
Unpack that for me, because you're saying a word that I
Okay.
know, but I don't know that everybody knows what I know. So what's an Iwi?
So let's see. So I have an electric wind instrument. I actually have a lot of electric wind instruments, but it's not super well known. But it actually came out in this era, in really starting in the 80s. Not with the Iwi itself, but other earlier devices like the Lyricon or the EV, the electric valve instrument, which was basically a way to get people who could play wind instruments or brass players, get them into synthesis. And these were early forms of synthesis, additive synthesis and analog synthesis. And, this was actually before FM really hit it big in the mid 80s. So the Lyricon was all additive synthesis, where you're just adding partials. Like, okay, I'm gonna add these partials in a similar way to organists just adding stops on their organ, except they were playing with a wind device
kind of like
that would drive this synthesizer.
Clarinet keytar. It's like a
Yes.
saxophone synthesizer, essentially. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Here's my modern Iwi, and it has like kind of a sax type fingering.
Gotcha.
This is a pretty modern one from the early 2010s.
Gotcha.
But let me just go here.
Oh yeah, go there.
The format hasn't changed much. So like this is an Iwi 3000 from the 90s.
Yep.
Which I use this to drive an analog synth that is over here too. So yeah, I'm really into that particular sound, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to, deliver these different types of synth tones, in addition to the stuff that I'm also very comfortable with, 90s romplers and sample-based instruments, and that's what I was kind of alluding to this before. Like, so many of the projects that I had been on at the time that Alex asked me about were things that asked me to do, orchestral mock-up or acoustic or more hard rocking type stuff. And now he says this, and I'm like, oh, wait, the sounds of the 70s and 80s. I know I can do that, but it's been a while since I've been asked to do this for to deliver on a project like this. But it was really fun to break this out and make sure that I can make this still happen.
Nice.
Yeah, it was kind of like musical tennis in the end. It was great. We started off with that compass of Solid State Survivor by YMO. In the end, we wrote 22 songs in the end between us. I think it was 12 by me and 10 by Vincent. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But anyway, we started off with that as our starting point. And of course, nobody can do YMO like YMO does, so we're never going to get there. But that's all right. That's sort of the compass pointing the direction. But as we started going, it was like, Vince, okay, I see your Iwi. I raise you some hot acid house or like this JV 1080 orchestra hit sample. Let's see what you're going to do now, Vince, hey? And then Vince rips into this like amazing like 70s, keyboard solos. Like, okay, I'm gonna have to bring it now. So here's my acid house track, and we had some Italo disco, and we had some it's like straight up 70s fusion that Vince did a few great tracks, and Vince did a few sort of a little bit more almost music concrete experimental one or two tracks in there, and I did some stuff. My DAW of choice most of the time is actually Renoise, which is a tracker, sort of archaic mid-90s 16-bit, well actually 8-bit originally, music sequencing technology. But that was really fun because I could do a lot of actually the title music that you heard just now in the in that trailer, that was done in Renoise as well. And there's a lot of capabilities in there that you can do with any other modern DAW, but Renoise a tracker just makes it so much faster and easier when you basically have sample level control over pitch and vibrato and portamento and things like that, gliding between individual notes of the same instrument, which is a little bit more difficult unless you're using fancy pants MPE stuff. Yeah, but it was just so much fun. It was just sort of, we ended up at the end, after 22 songs, being quite a far way away from Yellow Magic Orchestra and Solid State Survivor, but that's all right. I mean, the ultimate goal was diversity, and I think that's one of the reasons I was so happy to have Vince working with me, because our music are very, very different. You know, we both have totally different styles of music. We're sort of trying to we're both seeing YMO from our own perspective, with our own skill sets and our own kind of backgrounds and experience and approaches to making music. And it's just coming out in this really weird, diverse, kind of eclectic, bizarre set of songs for this radio station. And
but I love how you both bring your own experience, your own instrumentation, your own production techniques, but that it's in that collaboration that it becomes the soundtrack of Spacefolk City. So a true collaboration in that way.
Exactly.
And now it's a radio station. You got these tracks. They're randomizing. They're shuffling. You got a playlist. But tell me more about the radio in the game. You got the headphones you put on, and I know we have a demo queued up here that we can roll for folks to give them a peek into that. Set that up for me. Sure.
Yeah, actually, it's important to mention that the headphones never made it in, unfortunately, because I wanted to have this cable that comes down here, actually connected to this floating yellow, the classic original yellow Sony Walkman.
Yeah.
I wanted it to look like that, and I had to convince Therese, no, it's got to be yellow, and it's got to have like blue writing on it, and it's got to be just there with this cable coming out. But the cable, we never actually got around to trying it, unfortunately. But it was pretty clear that, like, for VR accessibility, having this thing is like attached to your head as you move your head, that's not going to fly. So unfortunately, we had to give up the idea of the headphones. So yeah, unfortunately, the VR immersion cynics out there will point out that, like, the radio's there, it has a little speaker on it, but the music's locked to my head. What's going on, guys? But anyway, let's hopefully people let that slide on the quality of the music.
Okay, so should I roll this then, or you want to set it up a little bit more?
Yeah, let's I guess before you roll that, it's probably just worth mentioning two of the main features that you're going to see in this clip.
Great.
So with the radio, two things need to happen with the radio. Number one, you need to be able to turn it off. Sadly, some people may not appreciate excellent music. It's fine. We kept to cater to everyone, whatever. So it has to be an on-off switch. The other one was, obviously, you need a loudness button. Of course you need a loudness button.
Yeah, I mean, every boombox had them back in the day, so why wouldn't you?
That's right. And I actually mentioned this in the article that I had the pleasure of writing for the Audiokinetic blog, that I was used to wonder with a loudness button. It makes music sound so good when I was young and foolish. It makes music sound so good. Why would you ever, why do you need that? Why don't you just have it on all the time? Who would ever want to switch that off? So that's what the loudness button does in our game as well. It's on by default, and if you switch it off, the sound becomes this ridiculous, tinny little, awful transistor radio sound. None of our players have actually commented on the loudness button, so clearly my humor there was completely lost or unsuccessful or just not funny. So, but whatever, that's fine.
It's a deep take.
I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
So you have to look at the video.
Okay, cool. Here it goes. Rolling video. Nice. And that I'm going to have the loudness button on all the time, like without a doubt, right?
Yeah.
And having the having that ability to, it had a skip button so that you can fast forward to the next track.
Yeah, that was actually not one of the original features. That was actually a player request feature.
Okay.
Because that was before we'd released the soundtrack, which we released, I think that was yesterday or 2 days ago. People wanted to hear their favorite songs, and it's like, well, it's a radio station. You just got to wait for it. But no, that's just why would you do it that way? Let's just put in a skip button so that you can go to the next song if you want to skip to your favorite track.
Yeah, this isn't reality, Alex. It's virtual reality.
That's right.
It's a better form of reality where you can skip the radio, I guess.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and if anybody's interested in how that effect was done with the loudness button, and also what we did for the sound of space, which is a fun conversation that Vince and I had, the sound of space. All of those details are actually in that article that is up on the Audiokinetic blog today.
We got that linked in the chats, so folks can jump off and dig in deeper on those systems as well. Folks who are tuned in, drop any questions you have into the chat, and we'll carry them to the conversation here. That's one of the beautiful things of live streaming, is having these moments that we can engage and carry the conversation to you. So let us know if there's something you're wondering about.
Yeah. So I thought it might be a good opportunity to talk about some of the things that we don't actually touch on in that article, and two in particular, or I guess one which is probably a bit more interesting. That is the language. So when the Spacefolk arrive, they speak to you in this kind of funny. What's the name of the language that they use in The Sims? What's that?
Simlish?
Yeah, we called it Folkish. Actually, I'll just show you. Never before seen publicly. This.
Ta-da!
It's a PDF. How boring. No, so this, can you see that all right? Should I zoom in a bit?
Looks okay.
It's okay. Maybe if
it looks good.
Does it? If I do this, will it zoom in?
Yeah,
a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was actually this is how we created the language of Folkish. And there were 3 versions of it. So this is the 3rd iteration. And basically, I knew that the way that I was going to do this in Wwise, very simple implementation. I knew that all I would be doing was just recording the sounds, dropping them into this big randomized container, and just sort of randomly picking and choosing from this pool. So I wanted sounds that would connect together very nicely when you play them successively, one after the other, very, very rapidly. So the consonants. So I took sort of an approach somewhere in between Swedish and Japanese. I speak Japanese, so that was helpful. But Swedish as well. I took the vowels from some of the vowels from Swedish, some of the vowels from English, added consonants that will. So like in Japanese, where you start with a consonant or a hard sound, but you're always ending with a vowel in Japanese. In this case, I wanted to make sure that we started with a consonant, and there were just a few cases where you could end with a consonant, but those consonants had to be able to flow into the next sound quite smoothly. And so, as you can see here, I chose G and V, G and V, to be things that could end a sound, but other than that, it would be like Japanese, where it's all consonant followed by vowel. And after a bunch of experiments where I recorded myself doing this many, many times to see if it would sound okay when it was all randomly triggered in rapid succession, this version 3 was what we narrowed it down to. Originally, we were going to have every one of our contractors, Vince included, actually record these so that we could have a whole range of voices to put into the game. But as it always is with a large game by a small company, you run out of time, and it just wasn't possible in the end, unfortunately.
Well, that's a sidetrack. Vince is actually radio announcer.
He is.
Sorry, it's in the article. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not, no spoilers here. But you did actually get Vince to do some recording.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I did do some of this Folkish a little bit, and tried doing some stuff in Reaper, and that was fun. It was actually really cool. But yeah, I am the radio DJ, and it was actually kind of fun. I guess a little aside, since I do music and sound for, my job, I usually like to decompress with talk shows. So I go on sports radio. I'll listen to random SoCal talk shows. And I'm really into that. Those guys like to affect the classic radio DJ voice, and I thought it would be fun to do that as well. So
can you reprise?
It's really just me. And
can you reprise your role here? Pull out a Spacefolk dialogue and bring that voice to us.
I don't know. Let's see. Cool tunes and hot beats. Spacefolk FM. You know.
Awesome.
It's pretty good. But yeah, obviously I did some processing on that. This is a cheap little mic, but I've actually got a somewhat nicer vocal mic that I use for stuff, and of course, giving it the big old FM broadcasting chain.
Yep.
I mean, seriously, yeah. I put it into like one of my vacuum tube preamps, compressor, and threw it in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could do pretty good at the whole DJ thing.
Nice.
That is not my natural voice, but it works out pretty well.
Cool.
Yeah, it does. Also, Vince did some amazing bumper, these typical, totally quintessentially, 80s FM radio bumper, small little sort of jingles, basically.
Nice.
So perfect. And together with Vince's like really, really compressed, squashed, proximity effect, DJ voice kind of things like just now, it came out really well. Those, you can hear those actually on the soundtrack release. We've just done volume 1 of the soundtrack, and that's got 2 of them. There's another 2 coming in volume 2 as well.
Awesome. Crowd's going wild in the chat, loving that rendition. And then we've got a comment from Sophia Sound. The linguistics nerd in me loves this Folkish V3 chart. So let's cut back to that, because I want to hear a little bit about, can we hear a sample of what that is like in Wise?
Yes, we can. So let me just pull that up for you. Okay. All right. You seeing this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hope we can hear it okay. So here's, this is my Wise setup. Look at this bus setup. I remember I caught a little bit of Hazelight's audio presentation from last episode, and it's like, yep, here's our bus setup. There's massive. Obviously, their game is obviously hugely more expansive than ours is. But anyway, so yeah, we have down here a random container. Now you can see what we've got is I've got 4 random containers inside this random container. And why don't I just play a little bit first? Here we go. See if this works. Etc. etc. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's how the Spacefolk sound. So basically, we have in here. I'll just move this up a little bit. These are all of those sound phonemes that you just saw, read with a neutral tone. So they have as you can hear, it's basically me reading it just pitched up. I actually didn't pitch them up. I did it the proper old school way, where I read them very, very slowly, and then just did it, like tracker style, right? Yeah, who needs like pitch shifting? You just read it really slowly, and then what's that sample rate change? What do you call it when you?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
a sample.
sample rate. Yeah, I mean, it's basically the literal chipmunk effect from
Yeah.
back in the day. So yeah.
Yes. So anyway, so I just read them very, very slowly. And these are all the neutral ones. We had some pauses in here, and these are just blank samples that are basically gaps. So that when it's randomly pulling from the set, sometimes they'll have gaps that randomly chosen to make it sound like sentences. Here are all the same phonemes that we just saw, but these ones are rising. Yeah, so just to give it more of a natural tone. And then these ones, these are great. These are the best ones. Thinking. And then, of course, down here, I think these last two. No, is it this one? You got to have clear the throat, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Space is done.
And I see sprinkled out throughout this random container, you've got different weights for different playback probability.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is really an art, and you're tuning these things to try to get the right inflection across these different variations, as well as the silence or pause.
Exactly. Yeah, so this you can see here. These are the weights where basically after a lot of experimentation, we came down to around a 10% weight on the rising tones, 50% on the neutral tones, 30 for pauses, and then 1 for the ums and the ahs and the throat clearing. And that, in the end, it just sort of turned out to be a nice sort of balance. So if we just listen again. Yeah, etc.
Okay, well, do me a favor for a second. Crank up the pause probability so that there's more gaps in between. Just to hear a little bit about of how that would change things.
So if we push that up to 60. Yeah.
Nice.
The pauses themselves are very, very short, and actually inside the pause container, you can see that the short pauses are very common, where the long pauses are obviously very, very infrequent because they're supposed to be in between sentences. So,
but it all works out, and even in the variation there, I think it was cool to hear. Thank you for doing that. It really does show the art form of the technical implementation of the system. Right? It has a simplicity. It's tunable. You're able to find the right balance for what you were trying to communicate through the nonverbal language, and it really is convincing. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, I think that was the fun thing with this project was that, like, you know, obviously a lot of people watching this are going to be very experienced with using Wwise, and there's nothing here that's particularly complicated or particularly, you know, getting down to the real superpowers that Wwise has as an audio middleware solution. There's nothing really that complicated going on. It's just random containers with weights on them. But, you know, I think that ultimately it's about the result that we're after. And of course, having to do this as fast as I can. I mean, this was basically, I think the Folkish took a lot longer, but actually putting it into Wwise, this was the easy part. You know, This is like drop it in there and then adjust the weights. And I think probably a few hours, and they're like, okay, that's probably a good number to go with. Play it to Vince. Vince thought it was good. And then, okay, we're done. We can move on. So it was very much, you know, we had to move quite quickly with a lot of the sound implementation. So,
but it's very effective.
Yeah, even though there's nothing really fancy going on, it's really great to have a lot of these basic features within easy reach like that, just to get it done fast.
Yeah, the right solution is not always the most complex. I think
Right.
The longer you're at it in game audio, the more that is true. Like
Right.
simple systems to communicate effectively is ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, I'm not really out here to try and impress anybody. I just want to make the game sound like I think it should sound, and just to be good. And the focus of the game really is your interactions with things and your experience with building these cities. This game is probably less about total VR immersion and more just about a natural application of this 3D space and using your hands to move things about. That's more where the focus of the design of the game is. So therefore, I guess I could kind of, get away with a bit more of a stripped down audio approach, because it's less about, simulating a room and making sure that everything sounds like so perfectly immersive that like you're actually there. It's a little bit less of a focus on that in this case, and more of a focus on the gameplay and the interactions.
Well, and I'll say the aesthetics, right? What's really clear from the focus and collaboration that the two of you shared with bringing the music across, as well as the voice and the language here, the intention was not to make a complicated recreation of reality. It was to express the aesthetic of this world through sound in a way that reflected what was happening visually on screen. And I think that's a noble goal for any game, to have that intersection, right?
Yeah. One aspect in this game, which we can just touch on now, is so in Spacefolk City, your main resource are asteroids that are flying about that you probably saw in that little demo there. And you grab them and you have to pull them apart. When you pull them apart, they produce your building resource that we call scrap. And what we wanted to do in this case, I knew that pulling apart scrap is something that you're going to be doing for the whole time that you're playing the game. And that is like a fundamental interaction that you just have to do over and over again. So I wanted to make sure that the sound for that was kind of satisfying, something that just would feel really good to do. So this particular system was a bit more complicated to figure out, but what we did here, I'll just pull it up here. Let's see.
Vince, give me your best impression of this sound before we hear what it actually sounds like. I want to hear your best impression.
My best impression is like, kind of. It's like kind of.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
So why don't I just I'll just cut to I'm just going to cut to a video of
great.
some gameplay where you can actually hear. Let me see, where do I have it?
I see it.
See it? Okay, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Let's see how we go. Yeah, so we'll just come back to the to Wise here.
Great, nice work, team.
By the way, that was Alex on the bass on that particular track.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Flanked by dual basses. This is maybe not a surprise, but it sounded great.
One for each hand. Sorry. Anyway, so we'll just come back to where we Wise. Yes. Now, so what I wanted to do with the sound, there needed to be obviously the pop component of it, which is that. I made how many did I make? 17 variations of that. With all little bits of debris that you can hear as this building material pops out. And basically, the way that we have the rest of the component, what I wanted it to be able to do is that if you grab scrap like this and you pull it really slowly, then I wanted it to creak slowly. But if you pull it really quickly, I wanted it to sound like it's creaking really quickly. Ultimately, I think there are actually players, if there are any Spacefolk City players watching this, they'll know that there's actually a bug that I think if you pull it and then hold it there, the creaking sound will actually continue. It's supposed to stop. We're getting onto that. But anyway, I wanted it to be kind of like an accordion where you could actually do that and have it sort of like that if you wanted to. So the way that I did that is inside here, we have different intensities of creaking sounds. So actually, I think I need to... So what I'll do is I'll show you right from the blend container.
Yeah.
That will be smart.
And then what we'll see is you transitioning across the different intensities using the parameter you set up for pull velocity.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, this is the blend container. Yeah, so basically now, if I just play this. Whoops. Yeah, so you can see here in the blend container you have these different intensities. And velocity.
So that's how fast and...
It's how fast and how close you are to actually popping it.
Got it.
So if the pull amount is at 0, that means that you basically just grabbed it and you haven't started pulling yet. But if, let's say, your velocity is here in the middle somewhere, if you're pulling it apart very quickly, then obviously it's going to be louder and the clicks are going to be more intense. And then the pitch is just to give it that sense of kind of rip as you're popping.
That's fantastic. And so you're using a blend track. You've got your RTPCs coming in from the game side, game parameters. You're affecting the filtering, pitch, and volume across those different intensity containers of randomized sounds for each intensity.
Yeah.
Again, I would say an elegant system, well executed, simple maybe in nature, but extremely effective. And when you combine it with the break open, it all just falls into place and feels really satisfying.
Yeah, so that's again, there's nothing particularly fancy going on here, but I knew that in talking with Chris, we could get velocity out of how fast you're pulling, and we could get some kind of measure of start and end of pull, like the threshold before it actually pops open. So with those two parameters attached to that intensity and velocity, controlling the pitch and also the volume, and also then the frequency of those clicks. When you put it all together, then I'll just pop back to the video. Then hopefully, the goal was to be something that was kind of weirdly weirdly satisfying in a kind of popping bubble wrap kind of way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, we'll just see if we can catch some more sounds of that in here. What you see just there is one of the interesting things, one of the interesting aspects of the game is that you can actually place buildings at any orientation. They don't have to be, as you pick them out of the store, they look like normal houses and buildings, but you can actually turn them sideways or upside down, and actually you can kind of see that they don't really have a top. So they have doors all over them that you need for construction, and they just sort of can be inserted a bit like a 3D Tetris in any sort of way that you like. And that was part of our attempt to encourage people to build these clumps rather than big flat surface cities.
Right.
Again, to just sort of make more use of the VR medium in this case.
Yeah, and do you have? I saw a visual change when something was dockable. Is there some kind of audio UI that signals to the player that something is dockable? I know there was clicking as it was rotating into place. Do you communicate anything there?
Yeah, we do communicate. If you place it in an invalid placement, there is a sound that will actually go back like that and inform you that you've placed it wrong.
Got it.
Unfortunately, in the mechanics of Spacefolk City, we tried our best to make them as simple as possible, but it is quite hard to make a city building game where it's in 3 dimensions, where you have buildings that can go in any orientation, and you want to limit. We have to limit how large players can make their cities, which is kind of sad because that's, most people come to a city building game with the idea of wanting to make these big grand constructions. But just because we very quickly run into the processing limitations of the base level device, which was the Quest 1, and then when that happens, the game starts to slow down and you get, the frame rate starts to suffer. And we're just not really about having the player needing to stomach through uncomfortable VR experiences just because the game is fun. If it starts to slow down like that, then we need to sort of redesign the game ideally so that it doesn't ever get to that point. And that's been the sort of the ongoing struggle that we've had, because wonderfully players are enjoying it very much, which is so fantastic. It's blowing our minds. It's fantastic every day. But the one thing that comes up as a common complaint and something that people are a little disappointed by is that they can't make massive cities. They want to make these massive big things, and it's a difficult point for us,
Well, it doesn't
optimize.
It doesn't scale in the same way that a Katamari Damacy does, from like that tiny world to rolling the whole thing up. But it looks like there's a lot of depth and functionality to the world building here that it would take a long time to get bored of the joy and discovery that I'm seeing anyway.
Yeah, we do have some players who are amazing, who create these huge cities, and I don't know how they do it. It's amazing. Like I think either they're running on Rift on extremely powerful computers, but it's incredible. So that optimization is an ongoing thing with our game, and there are always little corners and stuff that we can cut to try and squeeze just a little bit of more performance out of the Quest 1. And then now we have, of course, Quest 2. The Quest 2 allows for a bit larger cities than the Quest 1, obviously.
Yeah. Huz Ready is commenting, interesting, and wondering if they could build upside down, too scared to waste scraps. Another comment from Matt Miller Audio. Good to see you, Matt. What a cool system. Recently realized that door creaks are similar to that scrap pulling, sequencing discrete sounds and he's saying that system makes perfect sense applying to a door that you can dynamically move, open and close. I think we're swiftly moving past the place in interactive audio where we need to have a canned one shot for an action. And this example of pulling the scrap, as Matt highlights here, is applicable to any dynamic object in a game that you might have player agency over. Whether that's opening a door or moving a rock or whatever the interaction is, if you have dynamic user control over it, a system like that can really support the player agency in that case.
Exactly. Hi, Matt. It's been a while. Anyway, yes, that's exactly right. With those creaks, we didn't actually. I did look through a bunch of door creak samples to see if I could do it as sample sound. In the end, it was not possible to get the level of control that I wanted over the frequency, like being able to ramp up the frequency of those clicks. So that's actually synthesized. So I did that. Actually, all of the sound effects, almost all of the sound effects that you hear, especially the UI sound effects, they're all synthesized. I used, I'm a big fan of Yuhi's products, and I used Barzil, which is Yuhi's modular sort of semi-FM, semi-subtractive analog synthesizer plugin. And that one I used for all of the sound effects for the UI. You could hear it just now in that video when I was opening the shop and pulling stuff out. That was all done with that. In fact, the only sounds that are not synthesized in this game are the doors, the sounds of construction, like where it needs to sound like a saw and a drill and a hammer and stuff like that. I think that's actually it. Most of them the majority of them are all just synthesized from scratch.
Well, and back to the brief, right? It totally locks into that aesthetic that you established up front and the direction that you collaborated with, the visual side to bring that together into what is an extremely aesthetically cohesive game and experience.
Yeah, and I think that's part of working with Vince, who was right from the beginning immediately on the same wavelength, pun intended. Sorry, on the same wavelength as I is with regard to the music, but then working side by side with Vince and Therese, working together, forming the visual concept of the game as the sound and the music was coming together, and later on the sound effects, and then of course later on the audio implementation.
Yeah,
it's just so much easier and it's just really a shortcut to a result at the end that visually and orally just sounds like it's come from the same seed, because it has,
Right.
So I'm definitely an advocate for starting early and starting with the music, going alongside with your concept art. And the last thing to mention on that point is the programmers like to have something to listen to while they are programming. So having actual tracks in the game, or like test tracks and stuff to listen to, it's really cool, and it helps people put people into a mood. If you throw up some visual concept art, it's quite prescriptive. You use what you have. We're visual people, so visual animals, aren't we? So when you see something, it's hard to interpret it. Your range for interpretation narrows because it's visual. It's there. Meanwhile, music, on the other hand, if you hear something, there is still some bandwidth, some
interpretation.
There's still some leeway for kind of left and right in terms of interpretation of what you feel when you hear something. And at the early stages, when you're collaborating with people, gameplay programmers, artists, modeling people, animation people, etc., having music as that kind of fundamental bedrock still allows people to sort of veer left and right and add their own character to something, which visual concept art, it's a bit harder to do that because it's so much more prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we found anyway. So we definitely encourage other teams, if you have the capability to do that, bring your music in right from the beginning and see what happens. It could produce a result that is really aesthetically very consistent.
Yeah, well, then it helps to have someone, somewhat outside of the deep day to day. And Vince, like, what was your process for throwing stuff to the development team? Like,
Yeah, I really tried to get in there. You were mentioning the doors, and it's funny because I had done some of those doors, and I remember when you were working on some older VR projects, how you would want to try to do synthesis for everything, and I actually tried to do that as well,
Really?
and oh my God, it didn't work. It didn't work. So, I mean, in the end, I went to, my usual thing. Okay, I recorded some stuff. I went to the library for some things and edited. Bam. There was the sirens, like the siren stuff. What was synthesized that I sent to you,
Yeah.
and but yeah, there were. It's really cool just seeing how you work with things, and it was a fun challenge trying to see. Oh, I wonder if I could do things the way that you might try to approach it, and realizing my brain doesn't quite work that way, which is okay. The diversity is a big factor here. The diversity of how things were made is a good thing. But understanding it, understanding where other people are coming from was really cool. I didn't necessarily, he's not asking me to be Alex May Part 2, and that's good. I can't be that.
knowing the strengths of your collaborators and valuing those strengths, I think, and what they bring to the collaboration is good. Good delegation.
I think it's I guess sort of along those lines is that Alex, he mentioned Wwise. He just went right to Wwise right away. And it had actually been a few years since that I had been on a project that used Wwise. For a while, I was doing things that rolled their own audio or used Fmod. So it was actually kind of fun getting back into Wwise and trying to do some of these implementation things. Nice. So, implementing the radio or implementing some of these other sound effects. That was actually really cool and really fun to come across some of those solutions. Alex would sometimes go on the Discord, because we would communicate in Discord, and say, I'm looking at your Wwise stuff and it seems to make sense, but it seems almost like the way that an Fmod person would do it, or something like that. And it's like, I guess, but honestly, it feels really good to me, and it seems like a really good solution. I think we can keep on moving with this, right? And for the most part, it's stuck.
Yeah, that's right. The radio system that actually is detailed in the blog article that Vince had done, I still haven't properly figured out how he did that, but it's in the article there. But actually, when I first looked at that, it's like that's a really interesting way to approach it. It's very Fmodian.
I guess it is sort of I don't know. Because I couldn't just take that thing and put it into Fmod right away. It's more like I wanted to think from the perspective of callback functions. And we actually didn't end up having to do any callback functions. It was just a matter of exit cues.
Yeah.
So just sort of flipping a little switch and being like, an exit cue does not have to be at the end of a song.
Right.
And similarly, an entrance doesn't have to be right at the beginning of the program material.
Facts.
And if you shift those around, then you can make it so that things overlap. Yeah. Because in FM radio, it'd be like, okay, the song is going, and the person's not going to say, hey, you're listening to Spacefolk FM right at the beginning. They'll probably say it 10 seconds into it, right before the vocalist comes in, or right before the melody comes in. He'll just say a quick thing, Spacefolk FM, and then drop out and let the song play. And then similarly at the end, he might come in right before the ending of the song actually plays. So playing around with the variety of radio bumpers and the variety of music, and not necessarily adding randomness to it, but just having differences in where you can enter and where you could exit, going through a random playlist sequence, gives the whole thing this FM radio flavor of things kind of riding on top of each other, but for the most part being continuous and fun.
And whether you're talking about a radio with bumpers, exits, and entrances that overlap, or whether you're talking about, a composition that has transitions between different parts and how you want those to start in time. You maybe want to have the pickup notes or the reverb tail, but still keep everything in sync. That's definitely one of the strengths of the Wwise music system in that regard, or at least you have leveraged that well, and we have seen that leveraged well in other games. So glad to hear that coming back to Wwise was a pleasurable experience, and you were able to accomplish something that was satisfying in that.
Oh yeah, it was great. It was just really funny though. We would be working on the same project. We're just grabbing it from Git, and things would look different. You could tell, hey, Vince worked on this thing and Alex worked on this thing. People talk about, say, programming style.
Yeah.
And when programmers are coming together working on something, they wouldn't necessarily do that, or how they actually structure classes. I'm going to include this, and it's a similar thing in these audio environments. I'm going to create this in this way.
Indeed.
So I love it. What else do we have on the agenda today? Are we blissfully and gracefully finding our path outward?
Hold on, we actually have some questions that have come up. Sorry, I'm actually not looking at the different live questions, but we have a few that have just been passed through here.
Cool. I've been weaving most of them in. The most recent one was a question about what inspired the idea of Spacefolk City, what came first, music or game. And I'm going to actually suggest folks loop back to the beginning where we introduced Spacefolk City and how this collaboration started. You did a great job of outlining that. So folks, at the end of this, loop right back around and your question will be answered.
Yeah, I just saw another one here from Who's Ready. He's asking who the original voice was for the Spacefolk. That's me. Yes.
Yep.
My Vince is the DJ. You'll hear there's a song where Vince is singing into a vocoder. There's I think there's two songs where you hear me. The City Defender song, not exactly a high point of my career. Anybody who plays the game will know the one that I'm talking about. Also, one of the other ones where I'm talking. That's another fun thing, just to quickly mention as we wrap it up there. One thing that Vince and I were trying to do was incorporate some of the hints of instructions for how to play the game into the lyrics of the songs.
Whoa,
there we go.
Yeah.
I've got some vocal transformers that I used on different songs.
Nice.
So, there's one song where I'm actually singing in Esperanto through this particular one, this Roland VT3.
Yeah.
And then there's another song where I'm just doing a couple of stuff and using this boy. It's interesting that you've got these vocal transformers, both made by Roland, and they actually sound very different. They just have very different feelings between it, and they're controllable in very different ways. But yeah, it's fun to record yourself a bit. But I feel like also it's hard to compete with scrap. I love that song where you're just like, okay, scrap, collect, yeah. Just all these imperatives.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. No, it was a lot of fun, but sort of dropping in hints of the instructions for how to play the game into the lyrics of each one of the songs became sort of like a a little Easter egg thing that players who know the game, who've listened to the songs, will know what I'm talking about. But the little Easter eggs here and there for the rules of the gameplay and the basic mechanics are in the lyrics. Some of them.
Yeah, and that's, you'll hear a bunch of that on the version 1 of the soundtrack that's out now.
That's right.
I got a link for that in the chat, along with a link to the article about Spacefolk City, the music, and a couple of the other systems. Folks can pick up Spacefolk City. What platforms is it on? Where can you get it?
You can get it on any of the Oculus devices, or the Meta devices, as they're called now. So the Quest 1, the Quest 2, the Rift. And it also is on Steam VR for all this, like Valve Index, and also on Viveport. So for the Vive devices, the HTC Vive devices, it's also available there. So please grab it. It was a challenging project, very, very ambitious for a tiny little company like us. We're actually three core people. And we sort of had contractors, including Vince, come and go through the production of the game. It was about a bit more than a year in production. And in total, I think it was about 8 or 9 people that we all worked together with, coming in and out through the course of the whole project. But yeah, for a game, yes, nobody told us at the beginning that city building games would be pretty tricky to do, especially when you're only essentially three people. It's a hard genre, but we're very proud of it. It's a fun game. We're really, really happy that players are enjoying it too. And also very proud to be the very first city building game on the Oculus Quest. So yeah, this is actually going to be an exciting year for city builders. We've got a few coming up in VR the first half of this year. So yeah, fans of city building games are going to have a lot more to enjoy. But we hope that you'll also continue to enjoy Spacefolk City as well.
Awesome. Well, it looks delightful. I hope people pick it up and spin the soundtrack, because it is good music. I love it so far. Thanks to you both for joining me in conversation today, being on Wise Up on Air and sharing the details of your interactive audio and music experience with the Wise community. So,
absolute privilege. Thank you.
Always glad to.
Big fans of the work you do and the work you do with the community. So it's a long time goal that I can check off to be able to have these conversations with you. So I will say thanks very much and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And
it's always a pleasure. I mean, honestly, with you've been contributing to the community for so long as well. So,
yeah,
it really is a pleasure.
Cheers. We do it because we love it, and that love goes further than this live stream here. So keep bringing it, and folks out there, if this is good for you, we're just going to keep them coming. Stay tuned. More Wise Up on Airs this year, along with a new version of Wise in the near future. Keep them peeled, get subscribed, sign up across our different channels, and we'll keep you up to date with what's cool with Wise and what's cool out there with developers using Wise. So thanks again to our special guests, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.